Good evening, everybody. My name is Anna, and I'm going to talk about Pythagoras. Excuse me. Pythagoras, he's a Greek math influencer. Now, I call them an influencer because, like modern influencers, he paved the way for mathematicians after him. So let's begin with our first slide. What do we know about Pythagoras? Now, there's very few personal records of him that we can't get from him directly. There's very little writings, in fact, that researchers and historians have been able to find that he has personally written. However, we do learn from his contemporaries, those that lived during his time, and his students, the Pythagoreans. We do know that he was a highly influential mathematician, and he was highly influenced by philosophers such as Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. One thing is certain, though, is that he was a very intelligent man, and he contributed very much to the mathematics world. In fact, he's well known for the theory that he's been credited for, which is the Pythagorean theorem. Now, before I talk about the Pythagorean theorem, I do want to talk about his life. He was born approximately 530 BCE in Samos Island. We see that over there. His parents were local merchants. He lived in various places. He lived in Egypt, in Babylon, in Italy, and many of the times he moved. He moved for different circumstances. He did leave one time his homeland because at that time there was a tyrant ruler, so he couldn't stay there and do his teachings in that location in his homeland. We do know that he formed a Pythagorean group, and I will talk a little bit more about something specific that he taught his followers, but some of the things that he did teach was vegetarianism, and he wanted them to be pacifists. He did not accept anybody of his followers if they were not pacifists. That was very important to him. We also know that he died in approximately 510 BCE, and that was in Metaponto, Italy. You do want to mention that some of the things that were happening during this time of his life was Cyrus the Great, as we've learned in history. He was a famous Persian king. During this time, in Samos, he had killed the king Croesus, and when he killed him, it was for the purpose of Cyrus, for the purpose of him becoming king. We also learned during this time that in 529 BCE, Cambyses II started ruling. Then 8 years later, Leonidas the first was born and later became the king of Sparta. We also know that I also learned through my research, that in 573 BC, there were games, kind of like the Olympic Games. They were called the Nemean Games. And they were very famous. They occurred once a year. And however, the condition is that they could not conflict with the Olympic Games. And everybody was able to participate in the sports. Or it was sports and music. And also, during this time, it was in 563 BC, Siddhartha Gautama, he was soon to become Buddha and started developing the study of Buddhism, which I thought was really interesting during this time that Pythagoras' life, this was occurring. All right, well, let's move on to the main focus of Pythagoras, and that is the Pythagorean theorem. So what is a Pythagorean theorem? So to understand the Pythagorean theorem, we need to know the geometric relationship of the sides of a right triangle. Now, we see this right triangle right here. I put an image. One of the angles has to be 90 degrees. It's always going to be 90 degrees. Now, the angle is a right angle. And we see two sides next to the right angle. We see that with the A and the B. And these sides are called legs. Then we have this other side right here, which is the longest side. This one is the hypotenuse. Now, the hypotenuse is always at the opposite sides of the 90-degree angle. And it's always going to be the longest side. The Pythagorean theorem says that, and I want to refer to this image, that the area of the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the areas on the square of the legs. And we see in this picture here, the area of the blue square right here is added to the area of the red square, and that makes the area of the blue square. So this is the theorem that Pythagoras is named after. Now, if the lengths of the legs are, and we see this noted here, A, B, and C, then we see this relationship is represented by the formula A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So now we have an understanding of what the Pythagorean is and what Pythagoras is credited for. I did want to add something else, just in my next slide. And I wanted to talk about what was Pythagoras' main teaching to his Pythagoreans. And this is something really important that he taught them and emphasized. I got this quote from this author, from his book, Pythagoras' Revenge, a Mathematical Mystery. The author's name is Arturo Sangali. And he mentions that the Pythagorean theorems, Pythagoras' followers, were taught that number was a living reality. Now, he showed them that it was divided into different categories, as you see on the screen. And I quote, arithmetic, number in itself, geometry, number in space, music or harmonics, number in time, and astronomy, number in space and time. Now, he was a strong advocate in his belief that numbers were the only way for anybody to be able to understand anything. Pythagoras felt that numbers manifested in every aspect of our lives, in nature, in creation, in art, and in music. So he wanted his followers to really absorb this. And, it's only appropriate why his followers had high respect for him, because of the way that he lived and the teachings. And so it's why his followers were the ones that gave him that credit, and is why we know that he's the one that the theorem comes from. Anyways, I hope you guys appreciated this presentation. I know that I appreciated Pythagoras for a number of things.